Okay, so good morning everyone. My name is Astrid and I am from the Ghent University in Belgium. I'm very excited to be here today because I'm relatively new to PIAAC, so I'm very excited to get to know some of you, but also to gather some inspiration for my own research, where I will also be using PIAAC data. I myself am relatively new, as I mentioned before. I started working on PIAAC in December of 2024. So that means that I joined the PIAAC team when PIAAC in Flanders was already in the last stage. That means that I mainly helped writing the second Flemish report, which focuses on lifelong learning in Flanders. And this also means that I was not really involved in the previous stages, so that makes me more excited to meet some international faces. Okay, so here's a quick overview of what we will discuss today. But first of all, why is it important to talk about lifelong learning? We are currently living in a rapidly changing society. We can all feel it in everyday life. There is a lot of automation going on. New technologies are being designed every day, and new digital skills are becoming more and more important for adults. This means that there is a constant need for adults to update their skills to adapt to these new realities. And for this, upskilling and reskilling, lifelong learning could be particularly important. In addition, lifelong learning could also be important for the personal development of adults, especially when we look at non-formal learning. So we know that lifelong learning is important, but still we see that not all adults participate to the same extent. We see that more vulnerable groups in society tend to participate less, and this participation gap could be an indication that there are more structural barriers experienced by these adults, which make them participate less. So in PIAAC, we look at formal, non-formal, and informal learning. The biggest difference between formal and non-formal learning is that formal learning leads to recognized certificates or diplomas, while non-formal learning does not. PIAAC also looks at learning at work as a kind of informal learning, and for this, the PIAAC data includes a Learn at Work index. In this presentation, we will focus specifically on the participation in non-formal learning because we have the richest data on this type of learning. Okay, but why is it important to participate in lifelong learning? In this part, I will discuss some benefits that adults experience when they participate in lifelong learning. But before we do so, it is important to note that the associations we will discuss are not automatically causal relationships. It could be possible that these relationships run in both directions. For example, participation could lead to more favorable characteristics, but it is also possible that adults with certain characteristics are just more likely to participate. So first of all, we see that there is a significant association between participating and the literacy score of adults. In Flanders, we see that participants in non-formal learning score on average 31 points higher in literacy than adults who indicated that they did not participate in the last year. We also see a significant association between participation and social trust. This means that participants score significantly higher on the social trust scale than non-participants, and the likelihood of participation also increases as social trust rises. We also see that participation is related to health. This means that adults who participated in non-formal learning indicated that they feel healthier than adults who did not participate. But also here, it could be the other way around, that adults who feel healthier are just more likely to participate. We also see a significant association between life satisfaction and lifelong learning. We see that adults who are more satisfied with their lives tend to participate more often, but it could also be that adults who participate are more satisfied with their lives. Lastly, we found an association between participation and monthly income. We see in Flanders that on average, the participants earn more than non-participants, and as adults fall into higher income categories, they are also more likely to participate. So we have now seen that participation is not only important for upskilling and reskilling, but also for the personal development of adults, and we also see that participation has some benefits for adults. But still we see that not all adults participate to the same extent. And in this part of the presentation, I will zoom in on the participation rates in Flanders according to some different socio-demographic characteristics. First of all, when we look at gender, we see that 49% of men indicated that they participated in non-formal learning in the last year, compared to 50% of women. So that means that here we do not see a significant difference in the participation rates. When we look at the different age categories, we do see some significant differences. It is very clear on this graph that the oldest and youngest age group have the lowest participation rates, while the highest participation rates are among the 25 to 34-year-olds in Flanders. Before we look at the educational levels, it is important to know how they are defined. First of all, we have the low-educated adults. These are all adults who did not attain a secondary education diploma. The medium-educated adults have attained a secondary education diploma, and highly educated adults have a higher education diploma. So when we look at their participation rates, it is very clear on this graph that the low-educated adults participate the least in Flanders. Only 27% of these adults indicated that they followed a non-formal training course in the last year. This percentage rises until 40% for the medium-educated adults, and the high-educated adults, we can very clearly see that, participate the most. 62% of these adults indicated that they participated in the last year. So that means that we see a participation gap between the low and high-educated adults of almost 35%. When we look at migration background, we distinguish between three categories. We have the first-generation migrants. These are all adults who are born in a foreign country themselves. Then we have the second generation. These are adults who are born in Flanders but have at least one parent who is not born in Flanders. And then the last group are the natives. These are the adults who are born in Flanders with both of their parents also born in Flanders. So when we look at their participation rates, we can again see some significant differences. We see that among the first generation migrants, 38% indicated that they participated in the last year. This was 43% for the second generation migrants and 51% among the natives. So here again we see a participation gap. So we now know that the participation varies greatly according to the socio-demographic characteristics of adults, and that made us interested in investigating why some adults participate less, what barriers they experience. For this, we distinguish between adults who indicated that they already participated and adults who indicated that they did not. We found that 29% of the participants indicated that they wanted to participate more often, but that they were hindered by barriers. This means that 71% experienced no barriers or had no interest in participating more often. When we look at the non-participants, this pattern is even more pronounced. Here we see that 12% wanted to participate but experienced barriers, and nearly 9 out of 10 adults had no interest. When we then zoom in on what barriers the adults experience, we see that the biggest barriers for those who wanted to participate were work obligations. This is very clear on the graph as well, but we also see that family obligations or the time or place of a training course are important barriers. In the previous part of this presentation, we found that low-educated adults participate the least, and that made us interested in investigating what specific barriers these adults experienced. And we found that these low-educated adults indicated, at least, that they were less hindered by work and family obligations. But we also see that the category other barriers is notably more often selected by these adults. This means that low-educated adults experience different barriers than high-educated adults. But from PIAAC, we do not completely understand what these other barriers are. My colleague, Lesse van Nieuwenhove, did some additional research on this in the previous cycle of PIAAC. And one important hypothesis that arose from her research is that these other barriers could be psychosocial barriers or dispositional barriers. Because these barriers are less included in research and also in the PIAAC questionnaire, but these barriers still seem to be important for low-educated adults. Okay, so to end this presentation, I would like to highlight some insights and recommendations. First of all, we found that the participation among low-educated and medium-educated adults, as well as among the first-generation migrants, remains very low. And this low participation among the more vulnerable groups in society increases the risk of a Matthew effect. So this means that the highly educated adults increasingly accumulate advantages by updating their skills through participation, while low-educated adults fall behind because they participate less. And as a result, the gap between low and high-educated adults keeps on widening instead of closing. This means that the social and economic benefits of non-formal education are not equally distributed in society. We also found that there was only a small group of adults who indicated that they were interested in participation, but that they were hindered by barriers. This could mean that participation is not only limited by external and conscious obstacles, but also by a lack of interest or a perceived need for learning. Adults who did experience barriers named work obligations and family obligations as the most important barriers. And this points to a need for more support and flexibility from employers, as well as measures such as childcare or family-friendly scheduling in adult education. Another important finding then from this research is that low-educated adults experience different barriers than high-educated adults. These barriers remain mainly invisible in the research, also in the PIAAC research, and it could be possible that these are psychosocial barriers. All these results point to a need for a more integrated policy approach. We need to remove obstacles and strengthen the learning culture in Flanders. It is essential that we ensure accessible and flexible learning for all adults, especially for the more vulnerable adults that tend to participate less in non-formal learning. We have to remove visible barriers, but also uncover the invisible ones, and actively invest in strengthening the learning culture. Okay, so to end this presentation, I would like to mention that in Flanders, we worked on two different PIAAC reports. The first report discusses the more general results of the second cycle of PIAAC, while the second report focuses specifically on lifelong learning. The first report is already published. The second report is also finished, but we are currently awaiting the publication of this report. Okay, I have reached the end of my presentation. I would like to thank you all for your attention, and if you have some questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.